The wire confirmation email arrived at 6:47 in the morning, Vienna time. I was sitting in a hotel breakfast room, eating a croissant I could not taste, watching snow fall on a cobblestone street outside the window. My phone was flat on the table next to my coffee cup, face up, the way you leave it when you are waiting for something important. The notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. Subject: Congratulations, sale of 14B Harlow Street, Unit 4, transaction complete. I read it twice. Then I set the croissant down very carefully on the plate. I did not scream. I did not call my brother. I did not call the police. I did not cry into the Austrian snow falling softly outside the glass. I opened my notes app and I started a list, because I am not the kind of person who screams. I am the kind of person who makes lists, and this list was going to end my brother's life as he knew it. My name is Priya. I am 34 years old. I grew up in a suburb of Houston, in a house where the rules were simple and unspoken and never once written down, which meant they could be changed without warning depending on who needed what. My brother Rohan is 38. He is 4 years older than me, which in our family translated into 4 years of accumulated authority he never had to earn and never stopped spending. My parents came from Hyderabad in 1987 with 2 suitcases and a specific vision of what success looked like. Success looked like a son. A son who led, a son who decided, a son who was trusted with the important things because the important things were too heavy for daughters to carry. I do not say this bitterly. I say it the way a structural engineer describes a fault line, clinically. Because understanding the architecture of a system is the first step to knowing exactly where to apply pressure. I was the smart one. I was the quiet one. I was the one who graduated top of my engineering class and got hired at a logistics firm in Chicago at 24 and was promoted 3 times in 5 years and bought my own apartment at 27 with a down payment I had saved by living on rice and grocery store rotisserie chicken for 2 years. Unit 4B, 14 Harlow Street, Lincoln Park, Chicago, 2 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a north-facing window that made the whole living room glow on winter mornings like the inside of a lantern. It was mine. Completely, legally, entirely mine. My name on the deed. My name on the mortgage. My savings poured into every inch of it. Rohan had nothing to do with it. He had never even helped me move a box. But Rohan had a talent. He had a single specific talent that he had been polishing his entire life like a stone in a tumbler. And that talent was convincing our parents that whatever he wanted was actually what was best for the family. Let me tell you about the job in Vienna. 18 months ago, my company won a major infrastructure contract with a European logistics consortium. They needed a senior project manager on the ground in Austria for a minimum of 12 months, possibly longer. The position came with a generous relocation package, a significant salary increase, and the kind of professional visibility that would change the trajectory of my entire career. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. I knew it immediately. I also knew it would be a problem. Because my apartment could not sit empty for 12 months, the mortgage still had to be paid. So I made a clean, legal, simple decision. I would rent it out. I would hire a property management company, run background checks on tenants, sign a 12-month lease, and let the rental income cover the mortgage while I was overseas. I told Rohan about the plan because our mother asked me to keep him informed about family matters. In her mind, my apartment was a family matter. In my mind, it was my private property, but I had learned long ago that arguing that point cost more energy than it returned. Rohan listened to my plan. He nodded. He said it made sense. He said he would help. Those 3 words, I will help. In the vocabulary of a man like Rohan, those words do not mean assistance. They mean access. They mean opportunity. They mean he had just spotted a door left slightly open and was already measuring the width of it with his shoulder. I did not know that then. I would learn it. I left for Vienna on a Tuesday in March with 2 checked bags, my laptop, and a property management agreement signed with Anchor Realty, a firm I had vetted carefully and paid a management fee to handle everything. For 6 months, everything was fine. The tenant, a young software engineer named Daniel, paid on time. The management company sent monthly reports. My mortgage was covered. I was building something real in Vienna, something I was proud of, and Chicago hummed along peacefully 4,000 miles away without needing anything from me. Then Anchor Realty sent me an email in September. They were confused. The owner of record, a Mr. Rohan Kapoor, had contacted them directly and informed them that the property management agreement was being terminated. He had sent them a copy of what appeared to be a new deed, showing himself as the sole owner of Unit 4B, 14 Harlow Street, and a power of attorney document authorizing him to act on the property. He had given Daniel 30 days' notice to vacate. I read the email standing in a tram in Vienna, my hand gripping the overhead rail, the city sliding past the windows in a gray blur. I called Anchor Realty immediately. The manager, a man named Tom, answered on the second ring. He sounded careful. The kind of careful that means someone has already started thinking about liability. He told me Rohan had presented a notarized deed and a power of attorney. Both looked legitimate on their face. He had copies faxed to their legal department. They were waiting to hear back but had followed standard protocol and processed the termination notice. I asked him to send me the documents immediately. They arrived in my inbox 3 minutes later. I opened the deed first. The paper was convincing. Official-looking seals, notary stamp. County recorder formatting. My name had been removed and replaced with Rohan's. The transfer date showed 6 weeks ago, a date when I was in Vienna, had never left Vienna, and had signed nothing. I opened the power of attorney. My signature was at the bottom. I stared at my own name written in handwriting I did not recognize. It was a forgery. A federal felony forgery that my brother had apparently committed with enough confidence to fax it to a real estate management company. I set my phone down in my lap and watched the tram roll through the city. Here is what I understood in that moment. I understood it the way you understand something that has always been true but that you kept choosing not to look at directly. Rohan was not impulsive. He was not emotional. He did not do reckless things in anger. Everything he did was calculated. The forged deed, the forged power of attorney, the termination of my management company. These were not the actions of a man who had snapped. These were the actions of a man who had been planning, which meant he thought he had covered himself, which meant he had not accounted for me. I did not call him, not yet. I called a real estate attorney in Chicago named Patricia Osei, who had been referred to me by a colleague. I reached her at 7 in the morning, Chicago time. I told her everything in under 5 minutes. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in a voice that was careful and precise and absolutely certain, "Do not contact your brother. Do not confront your parents. Do not alert anyone that you know. We need to understand the full extent of what has been filed before you make a single move." I wrote that down in my notes app. Do not contact Rohan. I underlined it twice. I am going to be honest with you. That instruction cost me more than anything else in this story, because I am human. Because that was my apartment. Because those were my hardwood floors and my north-facing window and my 2 years of grocery store chicken. And because my brother had looked me in the eye and said, "I will help," and then spent 6 months quietly building the scaffolding of my dispossession. The rage was there. It was enormous and clean and cold, like standing in front of an open industrial freezer. I felt every cell of it, but I had watched my brother operate my entire life. I had watched him perform helplessness and generosity and filial duty until everyone around him was precisely positioned for his benefit. I had watched him convince my parents to give him the family car, the emergency fund, the benefit of every doubt in every room. The one thing he had never seen me do was stop reacting, and that was about to become the most expensive thing he had ever missed. Over the next 9 days, Patricia built the case. What she found was meticulous and damning and almost impressive in its stupidity. Rohan had filed the forged deed with the Cook County Recorder of Deeds 6 weeks earlier. He had used a notary whose stamp he had apparently obtained through a connection at a title company where a friend of his worked. He had listed himself as the grantee on a quitclaim deed with my forged signature as the grantor. Then he had done something that told me everything about how much he underestimated me. He had immediately listed the apartment for sale, not for rent, for sale. He had hired a real estate agent, staged the apartment while Daniel was still living there, and accepted an offer of $387,000 from a buyer named Marcus Webb, a young couple relocating from Boston. The closing had happened 4 days before that breakfast email landed on my table in Vienna. Marcus Webb now owned my apartment, or thought he did. Patricia explained the legal situation with the patience of someone who has delivered terrible news before and knows that clarity is kindness. The Webbs were likely bona fide purchasers, meaning they had bought in good faith and were not culpable. The title insurer would likely have to make them whole. The real target, the only target, was Rohan. What Rohan had committed was not a family dispute. It was not a financial misunderstanding. It was not a cultural gray area about who controls family assets. It was real estate deed fraud, wire fraud, forgery of a notarized document, identity theft. And because the transaction had crossed state lines and involved a wire transfer over $250,000, it triggered federal jurisdiction. Patricia had already been in contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I asked her how long before they were ready to move. She said 2 weeks, maybe 3. I said fine. I booked a flight home to Houston, not to Chicago, Houston. I landed at George Bush Intercontinental on a Friday evening. My mother picked me up from arrivals. She was wearing the blue kurti she always wore when she was happy. She hugged me in the arrivals hall and told me how thin I looked and said the Vienna air must be too cold for my skin. In the car, she told me Rohan had wonderful news. She used that exact phrase, wonderful news. He had sold some property, she said. He was throwing a small dinner on Saturday to celebrate. The whole family was coming. She said it the way you announce a promotion or an engagement. Pride soaking every syllable. I said that sounded lovely. I smiled at the Houston freeway sliding past the window, and I said absolutely nothing else. The dinner was at my parents' house. My mother had cooked for 2 days. Biryani, dal, fresh roti, 3 kinds of chutney, a cake from the Indian bakery on Hillcroft that Rohan had always loved as a child. The dining table was laid with the good china. The kind that only came out for weddings and Diwali and moments my parents decided were worth commemorating. Rohan arrived at 7. He was wearing a new jacket. He had a new watch on his wrist, a thick, heavy thing that caught the light when he moved. He hugged our mother first. He shook hands with our uncle. He slapped our cousin on the back, then he turned and saw me standing in the kitchen doorway. For 1/2 second, something moved across his face. A flicker, the micro-expression of a man whose calculation has just encountered an unexpected variable. Then it was gone, replaced by his smile, the one he had been perfecting since he was 12 years old. "Priya," he said, "you came home." "I thought you were in Vienna until March. I decided to come early," I said. "I missed Mom's cooking." He studied me for exactly 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Then he walked to the dining table and sat at the head of it because Rohan always sat at the head of things. I watched him all through dinner. I watched him eat my mother's biryani and accept compliments from our relatives and describe the sale of the property as a sharp business move, a smart investment he had identified and executed. I watched him pour himself a second glass of whiskey and lean back in his chair with the particular satisfaction of a man who believes a chapter has closed cleanly. He did not know that I had been on the phone with Patricia every day for 2 weeks. He did not know that federal agents had been briefed and were waiting for the paperwork to clear. He did not know that the title company had flagged the deed as potentially fraudulent to their own legal department after Patricia's letter arrived. He did not know any of it. He only knew that the wire had cleared, that the money was in an account, and that his sister was apparently eating dinner at his parents' table, smiling, asking him about his new watch. I asked him about the watch deliberately. I asked him where he got it. He told me it was a treat for himself. "A reward? A man has to mark his wins, Priya," he said. I nodded. I said, "Absolutely." After dinner, my mother brought out the cake. She lit a candle on it even though it was not anyone's birthday. She just wanted to make it feel like a celebration. I watched her face when she looked at Rohan. The pride in it, the uncomplicated, unguarded love of a mother who had been told her son had done something wonderful. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for 2 minutes. I am not made of stone. I want to be clear about that. I felt the weight of what was coming. I felt it for my mother, who had made biryani and bought a cake. I felt it for the version of my family that existed in the story we told ourselves. I felt it the way you feel a tooth before the dentist pulls it, the ache of something that has to come out. Then I stood up. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror. I went back to the table and ate a piece of cake. The call from Patricia came on Monday morning. The warrant had been issued. Federal agents would be executing it that afternoon. I was in a coffee shop 4 blocks from my parents' house when the call came. I was on my second cup. I had slept better the night before than I had slept in 2 weeks. I asked Patricia one question. I asked if there was anything left for me to do. She said no. She said I had done everything right. She said to stay near my phone. I ordered a 3rd cup of coffee and read a magazine and waited. At 2:14 in the afternoon, 2 federal agents and 1 Chicago PD detective arrived at the real estate office, where Rohan was meeting with a client about a commercial leasing deal. I know the details because Patricia called me afterward and because I later read the arrest report. The agents walked into the conference room. They identified themselves. They told Rohan he was under arrest for real estate deed fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery of a notarized document. The client was asked to step out of the room. Rohan, according to the report, did not move for a full 4 seconds. He sat perfectly still in his chair, his new watch catching the fluorescent light, his face doing the calculation that had no good answer. Then he said, "I think there has been a misunderstanding." The agents said they could discuss that at the field office. He called our mother from the back of the federal vehicle. She called me 30 seconds later. I answered on the first ring. I want to tell you what happened in the legal aftermath because the details matter. Because this is not a story that ends with just an arrest. It ends with a reckoning. A full, complete, documented, court-stamped reckoning. Patricia's team worked with the federal prosecutor over the following weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The notary whose stamp had been used confessed immediately when federal agents arrived at his door. He had been paid $800 cash by Rohan. He had known the document was fraudulent. He became a cooperating witness. The title company employee who had allegedly assisted in the deed preparation was fired and referred to the state bar's disciplinary committee. The forged deed, the forged power of attorney, the wire transfer record, the chain of emails between Rohan and the real estate agent, the listing activity while Daniel was still my legal tenant, it was all there. Clear, documented, irrefutable. Rohan hired a private attorney, an expensive one. My parents paid the retainer. They mortgaged a portion of their savings to do it. My mother called me and used the phrase, for the family, more times than I could count. She cried on the phone. She told me to speak to the prosecutor on his behalf. She told me to explain that it was a family matter and families resolve things privately. I listened to all of it. I told my mother that I loved her. I told her that I could not intervene in a federal prosecution. I told her that Rohan had committed crimes against me that had nothing to do with family feeling and everything to do with federal law. She did not speak to me for 3 weeks after that. I understood. I did not stop loving her. But I understood that protecting Rohan from consequences was not a thing I was willing to do anymore, and that clarity cost something, and I was willing to pay it. The civil case ran parallel to the criminal one. The Webbs, the buyers, were represented by their own attorney. The title insurer stepped in to make them whole, as Patricia had predicted. They recovered their full purchase price and were eventually able to find another property. They were innocent parties in this. They had been victimized by Rohan just as surely as I had been. The title insurer then sued Rohan for the full $387,000 in subrogation. My own civil suit against Rohan was filed simultaneously. It sought damages for the fraudulent transfer, the wrongful termination of my management agreement, the lost rental income during the period of interference, and emotional distress. Rohan's attorney tried to argue that it was a family misunderstanding, that there had been a verbal agreement between us about the property, that I had informally granted him authority to manage it. Patricia demolished that argument in approximately 4 minutes of deposition. There was no verbal agreement. There was no informal grant of authority. There was a forged signature on a notarized document and an $800 cash payment to a corrupt notary and a wire transfer of $387,000 into an account that was not mine. The new watch, the attorney learned during discovery, had cost $4,200. It had been purchased 48 hours after the wire cleared. The criminal sentencing happened on a Thursday. I did not attend. I had gone back to Vienna by then. My contract in Austria still had 4 months remaining, and I honored it completely because I am the kind of person who honors her commitments. Patricia called me during the lunch break. Rohan was sentenced to 36 months in federal prison and 3 years of supervised probation. The court ordered full restitution of the title, insurers $387,000, and the damages from my civil suit. His real estate license, which he had held for 11 years, was permanently revoked by the state licensing board as a result of the conviction. The watch was seized as an asset purchased with proceeds of fraud. I want to tell you something about the silence that followed, because it is the part nobody talks about and the part that is actually the hardest. My father called me 2 days after the sentencing. He had not spoken to me in weeks. I could hear in his voice that something had shifted. Not completely, not enough to undo 40 years of a particular way of seeing his 2 children, but something. He did not apologize for what Rohan had done. He apologized for the watch comment at dinner. The one where Rohan had said a man has to mark his wins and my father had laughed and agreed. He said he did not know what the watch represented when he laughed at that dinner table. He said if he had known, he would not have laughed. I told him I believed him. I told him it was enough. It was not entirely true. But it was the truest thing I could offer him, and I offered it freely because my father is not my enemy. He is a man shaped by forces older than I am, doing his imperfect best with the architecture he was handed. I can love him and grieve the architecture at the same time. My mother took longer. She always takes longer. She loves fiercely and she protects fiercely, and when those 2 things point in opposite directions, she goes very quiet and does not move for a long time. She called me 4 months after the sentencing. She asked if I was eating well in Vienna. I told her I was. She said the weather must be very cold. I said it was. She asked when I was coming home. I told her soon. She said good, that was all. But I have been in this family long enough to understand the language underneath the language, and what my mother was saying underneath the weather, and the food was something she could not yet put into words, but was slowly, painfully learning how to mean. Unit 4B, 14 Harlow Street came back to me. It took 8 months of legal proceedings, a court order vacating the fraudulent deed, and a judge's ruling confirming me as the original and continuous owner of record. The Cook County Recorder of Deeds processed the corrective filing. The title came back into my name on a Wednesday afternoon. Patricia emailed me a PDF of the confirmed recording. I was sitting at my desk in Vienna. Outside the window, the city was gold and green with early summer. The Danube was glinting in the distance. I had a presentation to finish and a conference call in 20 minutes. I looked at the PDF for a long time. Then I saved it in a folder on my desktop labeled simply, Mine. I went back to my presentation. I walked back into my apartment and stood in the center of the room. Same hardwood. Same north window, same light. Rohan got 3 years, a permanent criminal record, and a revoked license. All for $387,000 he thought no one would notice. He underestimated one thing, not the law, not the FBI, me. He thought I would scream, he thought I would beg. He thought I would protect him because that's what I'd always done. Instead, I let him celebrate. I let him buy the watch. I let him cut the cake. Then I let the handcuffs close. If you're going to steal from someone, make sure they're not the kind of person who makes lists.